Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to another episode of Embrace the Opposite. I'm your host, Andrew Wormsley. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. Please hit the like button before we get into the video. Hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you're getting all of the notifications about new videos and new episodes that I'll be putting up, guys. So guys, how about this? Today I wanted to talk about It Ain't My Fault. Not necessarily the amazingly, wildly popular song from a lot of our youths by Silk, the Shocker, from the No Limit Soldiers. Not so much that song, although I put that into the intro for today's video. But I want to talk about fault and blame in relationships and why that is so important. Why do we avoid maybe putting the blame on ourselves when we may be the responsible party? And then who should apologize and why an apology is so important? It ain't my fault, or it isn't my fault, as my mom would probably want me to say, that key word fault is so important to look at. And especially when we're looking at relationships. When we talk about fault, a fault is some sort of imperfection. It's something that is a weak point in someone's character, and we all have them. Nobody out here is perfect, right? And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're dealing with our friend, our life partner, our spouse, anyone that's really consistently in our life. We got to understand that everybody has faults, including me, you. So we got to make sure that we're being careful with that word, for one. But another word along the same lines is blame. So, if I have a disagreement, or if something has happened, I forgot the keys or this or that, whose fault it is. And a lot of times for me personally, that's where my mind goes. So I'm always thinking about, when something bad happens, is that on me? And if it is on me, how can I divert? How can I push that blame off of me? And I think that's a normal response for most humans. I don't think anybody wants to go through life having all the blame on them for things that go wrong. But I think for some of us, it's more of a challenge to take on that blame. And I think it's different for everybody. For me, I can speak personally. For me, one of my love languages is words of encouragement or words of affirmation. So that's going to come from me doing something great or something positive or something good, well done. And if I did something wrong, and then that's followed up with the blame falling on me, it really takes away my ability to achieve and to feel my love language. And so I think we should be breaking down, if we have issues with taking blame, we really got to get to the root of why. Because even if we're right or wrong, if it was really our fault or if it wasn't, there's something inside of our minds that kind of usurps that, and that's how we feel in our emotions. And so whether it's my fault or not, if I want to get away from that feeling of blame, then I'm going to do things and say things and act a certain way that takes that blame off of me. But it's important to understand the root of where that comes from. So get to the root of why you have an issue with taking blame for things that you've done, and especially, again, in relationships, in your closest relationships. The other thing I think is important is to think about what we have to gain. So a lot of times in relationships, we may try to manipulate, we may try to say things or do things that makes the other person think that it wasn't our fault. In marriages, the divorce was his fault or her fault. I know people, and I'm one of these people, but I know people in my life that have the hardest time taking blame for certain things. It's almost like they're not even present in this reality. They're thinking about things in some sort of fantasy world, to where they think the issues and the problems are not their fault. Well, again, we got to get to the root of why a person feels that way. But then I think it's important to understand what this is doing to your partner, what this is doing to the other person when you're always trying to deflect. You're never taking on the responsibility. And what this does is this, and whether things are your fault or not, if you are consistently saying, that wasn't my fault, that's not my fault, I'm not the one to blame, it means that in a two-person relationship that the other person was to blame. So these are the things that we're kind of saying that kind of float under the radar. If we're pushing the blame off of us, that means it's falling on that other person. If we do this in a continual basis, that eventually is going to come to a place to put trust on the line, dependency on the line, and then ultimately it's going to put the overall love that's able to be garnered in that relationship on the line. And so you got to be careful. You know, if you have a problem, one, for taking the blame for things, and you're always deflecting, then that means that you're basically saying that was the other person's issue, the other person's fault. And so we got to be careful of doing that and making that other person feel that way on a continual basis. So the third part of this is really the apology. What is the apology? Why is it so important to utter and to say to the other person? And why do we have issues with it? I think we have issues with apologizing because for the same issues that we have issue with taking the blame. So the first step is, if you've done something wrong, or if something happens in the core of the relationship and you may have some of that responsibility, well, you have to own up to that. You have to take that responsibility on. These are big things. I don't want people to think that this is an automatic thing, like, oh, well, it's your fault, so you got to take the blame. No, these are things that many of us never learned, that many of us have a particular structure to our childhood that we were pushing off blame and we don't want to see blame. For me, again, my love language is linked to me doing things that are great and good and people noticing them. So I appreciate that. And so if I don't, so there's a lot there that we have to unpack first, right? But if you're pushing off the blame, you're more than likely putting it on that other person, and then you're more than likely gonna have resistance to apologizing. An apology is an acknowledgement of failure or regret, right? So we all have failures. We all have things that we've done, that we've said to our loved ones that we are regretful for. There's nothing wrong with apologizing for that. I've seen apologies have the most profound effect on someone's heart. And an apology is something that you can do that doesn't necessarily, it can have this really strong effect in the moment, but it can also have a great effect down the road for the person that received the apology. An apology doesn't have to be contingent on where that other person is. If I go up to someone and I've done them wrong and I apologize for that, I've uttered the words, I've proclaimed the regret for something that I have done. And I'm not only am owning up to what I have done and acknowledge that in a public sense to the other person, but I have also dealt with the blame, right? I've accepted the blame. These are two really important things that the other person that I'm speaking to or that I'm apologizing to is going to be able to know and to recognize. One, I've owned up to what I've done, and two, I am uttering the regret of that to you, which puts value into the relationship. So important, everybody out there listening. We have to have the ability to accept blame, acknowledge that we have fault in the matter, and then being able to apologize. That's kind of the last stage of this. And I'm not out here advocating for saying I'm sorry just because. I was watching a movie the other day, and one of the characters was always profusely apologizing, and the other character called them on it and was like, hey, you don't need to apologize for everything. So I'm not advocating for that, but I am advocating for recognizing when you have had fault in the action of a relationship. Again, whether that be your spouse, your loved ones, your life partner, your friend at work. It's so important to have that and to not be afraid of having faults, not be afraid of taking some of that blame for something that the other person was incredibly offended by, or there was disrespect. You can always offer up an apology. And I think that's so important. So that's kind of the final stage. So the 3 stages are accepting. Actually, first would be realizing why you have an issue with taking blame, and accepting that in some cases you are to blame. Okay. 2, and not being afraid of that. 2 is realizing that when you are saying it's not my fault, you are also saying it is your fault. And doing that on a continual basis can really hurt someone, hurt your partner. And then 3 would be having the ability to apologize in a respectful manner, uttering the apology, which is helping that person realize that you have regret, and also helping that person realize that you understand that some of that blame was on you. So guys, that's what I wanted to share today. I hope it was helpful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and comment. Let's talk about this idea of blame and apology and fault, and see if we can get to a deeper meaning for ourselves and for our relationships and for our loved ones, because I do think that there's more to have. There's a larger conversation to have on this topic. So hope everybody's doing well out there, and I'll holler at you guys next time. Peace.